Hey everyone, this is the Innovators Mindset with Dr. Lynn Moody. Here we go. All right. Listen, I am like so excited to have Dr. Lynn Moody, who is the president of Spark NC, but I did not know her. I knew her before then. She was actually the superintendent of Rowan Salisbury. And I'm like a little disappointed because I know somebody asked to be on here today, Amy Cottle, right? Amy Cottle, if you are
Yeah,
out there, Amy, if you're listening, you know, shout
I was
out.
gonna love that.
Yeah, no, and Amy, so I'm going to tell you about Dr. Lynn Moody before I'm going to let her tell you about herself. So I actually remember you all reached out to me. Uh, Literally, the I think you were the first group to reach out to me when COVID. Like, we need some help here. Like, right, and we did something. It was like April 2020 that I spoke with your group. And here's the thing that I really love about you and love about your work and love about your work with Amy is you're very focused on innovation and you're very focused on really kind of opening the boundaries of what we can do in education with technology, and your resume shows this. But the thing that I love about you is you do this in a very human-centered path. And this is all I've actually been challenged on this before because you're so focused on relationships. You're so focused on this. What does that have to do with innovation? I'm like, people will not try new things if they don't trust you, if they don't
Yeah.
actually, feel valued in their work, right? If you don't feel valued, you don't want to go above and beyond of what is possible. And so you're centering on that work, that human connection is why the districts you've worked with, why Spark and C has done so well to really be innovative, because you really start with that human centered innovation as opposed to just innovation for the sake of innovation. So you and I connected. I reconnected with you because of, I read some emails and just really appreciated just kind of how you really put people at the center of the work that you do. So Dr. Lynn, can you kind of just introduce yourself, tell us what you do today and how you got there? I think it's a great place to start.
Sure, great. And George, I think about that time when Amy introduced us and scheduled everything. We were, like in the like you said, very beginning of COVID, and our school district was completely one-to-one, and we never missed a day of school during COVID. And we had practiced it, but our teachers and families were so tired, like they were just so tired because we didn't miss any
Right.
school, and they were trying to adjust to that. So we took Wednesdays as this learning time, and that you were the first one we brought on. Like, you
Right.
can just spend some of your Wednesday morning with George, and it was great. So thank you for that. Thank you for starting that and helping us think about how we could
They
take a
were
break
wonderful.
on
I like
Wednesday.
distinctly remember because I was like terrified too. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing because this is like all really new to me. I'm not as good at
We
Zoom
were
as I
all
used to be. Yeah. So the group was
trying to
amazing.
figure it out.
Yeah. So
So
yeah,
I think I've
Dr. Lynn,
I think
tell
I
us what you
spent
do
my
today. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I spent my career trying to think about how schools could be different, mostly because schools didn't really work well for me back in the day, even when I was going to school. And then I spent, my career in watching schools operate and work. And so thinking about what really is learner centered, and then truly what's industry relevant, and then how it's competency based. Those three things have been part of what I've spent a lifetime
Mm.
thinking about how you could do that. So fortunate enough with Spark and C that when I left Rowan Salisbury, the General Assembly gave us some funding to try to figure that out and start something where we could have a diverse talent pipeline in the high tech career fields. We literally wrote the proposal on the day that Apple announced that they were coming to Raleigh as a headquarters, and the social media went crazy saying no one from North Carolina will ever get their jobs because they won't be prepared for them. And so it was like, how do we ensure that all of our students have an opportunity for those kinds of jobs, and realizing that many of our students didn't even attempt them because
Right.
it seemed so daunting to go into one of those fields, or a field like data analytics or design UX UI that they've never even heard the terminology for.
Yeah.
So how can we really design these fun learning experiences that they could really engage in, that were very project oriented, that they'd be proud of having something at the end of that where they could do it on their own pace. It was stackable, that they could collect it over a period of time. and it was work that mattered. And we spend a lot of time in schools doing what I call throwaway work.
Hmm.
You did it, we graded it, we throw it away. Like what work really matters for students.
Yeah, and so like, and this is one of the things is that weirdly enough, I've heard of Spark NC before, and I don't know if I've heard about it because I don't know if you know this. Amy and I are
It's
still
because
connected.
we're wonderful.
Yeah,
And
well, I see it. I see it because of Amy, and I see it because of you, and I've seen it. But I actually don't know much about it, which was like I was like, hey, I actually would love to have you on the podcast to talk about this. So tell me, so you're working with schools in North Carolina. You go in, your team goes in. So what? Tell me like what one of those experiences would look like for students, and like how does that work? So and how can people maybe create something similar in their organizations?
so we're currently in 24 school districts. Some and in those school districts, we have a Spark lab. They're really high tech, clean, modern labs. They look like Cisco and IBM and
Hmm.
SAS. So there's a high tech, modern lab. There's a Spark lab leader who is more of a coach and a facilitator. They obviously don't know all of those career pathways, nor should they, but they help coach a student
Hmm.
through. We have a learning platform that students use, and on our learning platform is about 70 different options in those pathways that students can do. Those units are about 15 hours worth of work. For some students, it takes longer. Some students, it's shorter, but about 15 hours worth of work. They can do that at their own pace and their own time. And they can jump from pathway to pathway. They could take 2 units in cybersecurity, and they could jump over and take 2 in data analytics. All of them are embedded with ethics
Hmm.
and verbal skills, so they work on those things as well. When they complete that project, and they for that particular learning unit, when they get 6 of those, they can stack them together and they can get a high school credit in computer science.
Hmm.
About half of our kids do it for other reasons. They have loftier goals. They just want to do the project, or
Right.
they want to fill out a college application that looks differently. Students have different goals of why they come into our lab, but many of our students will say they come into our lab and they never leave.
I love that. This is actually, you're the epitome of this in your organization, because you talked about this experience, where you have throwaway projects, and that's something that actually happens, often in schools. And I don't think it's because teachers want that, principals want that, but there is like, a system of things that, curriculums, whatever, people maybe that are out of touch outside of school, actually creating that for students that really don't understand the impact of it and how we lose so much time with it. And so the epitome of what you're doing is like saying like, hey, here's the constraint we want to work in. We still, the kids got to use this time. They still got to get credits. They still got to do this process, but can we actually make school a better process? And so like, I always talk about this, the idea of like, we always say you need to think outside the box, but you actually aren't thinking outside the box. You're saying, here's the box. How do we actually innovate with inside those constraints? Is that something you'd say is kind of accurate for what your organization is doing? Because I think that when I'm listening to you, it's like, hey, they're still getting credits for it, but they're doing work that is maybe leading to something that wasn't necessarily there before.
Yeah, and I'll say it's so much outside the box that it takes the right school district to be able to try to implement it successfully. So, for example, when we go into a school district to do this kind of work, it's not unusual that guidance counselors say to a student, well, you're not going to get, this is not going to raise your GPA.
Right.
So you might not want this experience. So we have students who are on full ride scholarships because they did a project inside of Spark. Or
Wow.
we have students who, we have one young man who started one of our learning units in game design. He never finished the unit at all, but he's almost finished a game that Epic has taken a look at. Like, I
Wow.
think it's a little more than high school credit. So it's really difficult to get educators to get out of their own way to say it's not about a grade for everybody. And it's not about, so that means it's not about a Carnegie unit for everybody.
Mm.
And and I mean, I think it's interesting. Even Carnegie is saying we've got to rethink this process
You know,
about.
the one of the, and it's one of the things that like I spent my summer obviously talking to schools. It's something I do every summer. And one of the things I'm very adamant about is The goal should not to be to get the kids to college. That is not the goal. It's how do you help kids find a pathway to success that is meaningful to them. So you have a student who I don't know, like when you tell that story, I don't know if they're going to college when they're building a game, but at the end of the day, if the game's good, no one's gonna say, "Wow, it's really good," but you didn't go to college. Like nobody cares at the end of the day. And I think that there are so many different opportunities for our kids that we don't necessarily. And when I say this, I always add this caveat. I'm not saying that kids shouldn't go to college. That is not my argument at all. It is that there are so many different opportunities for our kids that didn't necessarily exist in the way that we're doing. And so I really found it interesting that you talked about when you said, they might not improve their grades, but we're not even looking at grades. Like I'm sure that, no offense to your organization, I bet you some of the people you worked with, you have no idea of their high school grades or their college transcripts, but you know them as people, you know them, their body of work, and that says a lot about people. And so we have this notion grades define everything, but then we actually leave and they define very little. And it's more about like what's the work you do, what type of person you are. And so when you mention that idea of like ethics being embedded into this work, what do you mean by that? And like, what does that look like in some of the work that you're actually doing?
When you're in the tech fields in the tech industry, there's lots of questions about how do we use tech for good instead of for bad. So lots of arguments around AI or AI as a tool. And as you think about that, AI can be great. It can be terrible depending on how it's applied. So as we think about how we help our students in those particular tech areas, we talk about ethics, like how do you use that for good? How does that create something that's better because you use those tools?
That is okay. So I don't know if you read my email. I literally wrote this email because I've seen there's a Marshall McLuhan quote, and he's a Canadian philosopher. And you probably don't know if it's from Marshall McLuhan, but you've probably heard variations of this. He said basically we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. And you are seeing basically a lot of negative things in the world happen because we are so allowing our tools to shape our behaviors. And so what I pushed back on this weekend is like, hey, I actually don't, as much as I agree with that quote, I'm going to be very cognizant of it. And so I wrote these two, and this kind of lines with the work that you're talking about. I say 3 ways we should shape our technology usage. Technology should be used to elevate communities and bring us closer together. Technology should be used to stoke curiosity and deepen knowledge in the pursuit of developing wisdom. And technology should improve our personal well-being and overall health. So what you're talking about is really getting kids to kind of see that, I shouldn't even say kids, but your organization as well, is like, hey, how are we using this to kind of lift as opposed to, divide, which is happening a lot in communities, right? Like technology is becoming very divisive in some of the ways that you're doing. So when you're talking about this, for like, can you maybe with AI or something, like what's something that you do, like how do you embed those ethics into that process? Like for example, with AI, because I know that's a conversation that's happening all over education in the world right now.
Well, I'm going to use AI as an example. And this particular, that's a tool, right? So if you start thinking of it as a tool, like how can we use it to help? And people will argue, or they'll say, oh, it's really about the teacher in the classroom. It's not about technology. Well, that's true. And that's always going to be true. It's about the human relation. But what is it that a teacher has to do that takes up a lot of the teacher's time? So then they can't have a conversation with the student. We spend lots of time, for example, writing curriculum. We spend lots of time grading, which was always Molly's favorite thing to do, is grading. Like there's a lot of things that technology can do. So now that becomes automated. So now the teacher has more time for those conversations about how are you using that or what are you doing? And I think that you haven't asked me this question, but I probably never talk publicly without saying this. I think that our biggest challenge is that all of our directional systems are embedded towards standardized testing and improving standardized testing. Right. And we believe that to be the mark. And because of that, I mean, just the word standardized makes my skin crawl. Like people are standardized.
Right.
Like we want our kids standardized. So everything that we do is around the standardization. What if you could use your tools in a different way so it could be more personalized and individualized based on learning goals? The human teacher can't do that at that level, but with the right tools, we could, and then we could have conversations about what those learning goals are. And then here's ways in which you could do it. So I could customize 100 kids' lessons for the same thing for tomorrow instead of teaching to the middle. So those are ways to use it, I think, for good. And I think we can all think of bad ways to use it. Like now the teacher doesn't have any conversations with the students. They just, put them on technology. Those would be bad ways to use it.
Yeah, that was actually, and I talked about that too this weekend, is that when I kind of pushed back on technology earlier in my career because I saw a lot of teachers dumping off kids in a computer lab and like having them doing typing things. And it was like a great time for them to mark in the computer, and kids weren't even doing it properly or anything like that. And so my concern was, this actually is kind of breaking a relationship as opposed to improving it. And it wasn't really until I started immersing myself into it in different ways to see like, hey, here's a beneficial way. And I think really as educators, we've got to be learners. I know you're an amazing learner in the work that you do, not just in the technology and all the opportunities for kids, but actually how you know people. And so I'm going to ask you a question about if you some of the learning that you've done in this role, what would you, if you go back and talk to a superintendent? So now you're like, you're the president of a company that's working in education. So there's probably some different things you get to do as a superintendent because, you're not maybe you are reporting to a board, but it's probably a little bit different than, working with a board. What is some of the experience that you have in this role that might have changed some of the things that you did as a superintendent? Like what are some of the things that you've learned in this that maybe you could take back and say like, hey, if I was a superintendent now, knowing what I know, what is something you would maybe do differently or maybe rethink it in the classroom?
I think a lot about, I think I thought about it some then, but I realize that more and more as I talk to more and more employers, particularly in the high tech areas, is what is it that they really care about? I think that we assume, like what you mentioned earlier, that they care about grades, they care about credentials. There's a lot of conversations about credentials and college and did you go to the right school? And most parents push their kids to do this direction because they believe that that's the right thing to do, and less about what great problem they really want to solve and what do they need to do to be able to get there. And I wish that more superintendents felt the freedom to do what they believe is right by students, to really be learner centered and less about what they believe as adults. I think it got really freeing to me. And I would often ask principals this question: what do you believe so strongly you get fired over? Like, if you're not afraid to get fired, you make better choices.
Right,
like you
right.
just make better choices. But if you live in fear of losing your job, and unfortunately for many superintendents, boards are crazy. It's difficult. Like they're difficult. Even when you have a good board, like it's difficult to wrangle 7-9 people around a concept or an idea to move forward. And then you spend too much of your time being worried about, oh, if I don't do that, I'll be fired. Like, what's right by kids? And if you can honestly say that at the end of the day, I think you had a good day. I would often question myself, and I still do. Like, did I do anything today that really made the difference in the life of a child? Because we all get caught up in a lot of things that just make noise, and how busy we are. I think about it in being, one of our core areas is not just being learner centered, but industry relevant. So when we talk to someone in industry and they talk about the durable skills, and there's lots of conversations around the durable skills now, standardized testing doesn't allow for any of that. As a matter of fact, it goes in the face, flies in the face of it, because collaboration would be cheating, right? Under standardized testing or any kind of test. Like you and I wouldn't get to work together on our answer for the SAT or for the end of course grade coming up. But yeah, that's what employers say that they need. So there's a real mismatch between what it is that we really need in industry and what do we say will propel that for a student, and what is it that we're doing inside the classroom. And so I do think it's really interesting as you look at high school students, they become less and less engaged. And it's not about their level of intelligence. Like
Right.
really gifted kids become less engaged. So do kids that have special challenges.
So there's two things I'm thinking about as I'm listening to you. I remember, I won't say the state, but I was in a state, and the state commissioner of education was speaking before me, and I agreed with, I think, 99% of what the state commissioner said. And I'm like, he basically could have done my talk, right? Like he was saying very similar things. And so this is when I'm from Canada, so I'm like, what do I care what I say to this guy? So I pulled him aside. I said, listen, I love what you're saying. I hope the actions of your department back up what you're saying, because it's easy to say this in front of everybody and we all are saying, yeah, this is the way we need to go. But then when you're as you're talking about, you're saying we want this personalization, but then you're focused so on standardized testing. That is the action that is coming out of here. So it doesn't really matter. My mentor used to say to me, assessment drives your teaching, not the other way around. So like a lot of times we complain about teachers teaching the test, but then all we show is test scores. And it's like, well, that's why they're teaching the test, because that's what you're putting on a pedestal. The other thing that you talked about, that one of the best superintendents, and I know you and her would get along so amazingly well because of what you said. I think she's she's in her 70s for sure. And she's still superintendent, and she only takes 1-year contracts. She's like, listen, I'm going to do what I think is right. And if you don't like me, you have no concern. I'll be gone next year. And she has had that 1-year contract over and over and over again, because she does what she believes is right. And she builds relationships and connections. And I think the reason I weirdly connected with you, and there's a whole backstory, but we'll share it maybe another day, is I was looking back at some old emails, and before I even knew you, I referenced you on how you really put people at the center of your work. And when you do that, you'll always do the right thing. And I think that's really what epitomizes you. So it's so cool to see that you got this new venture going on and how successful it is. And I'm telling you, Amy, if you're listening, I'm expecting you on this podcast. Is she going to be on, Dr. Lynn?
Yeah, she'll be there.
All right.
She will be there.
Yeah, I'm expecting this. So it is so cool, the work that you're doing. And listen, Spark NC, maybe there's a Spark FL sometime, right? I know you're expanding as well. So Dr. Lynn, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to be a part of this. Like, it's so cool to connect with you. And I love not only your work, but who you are as a person. I really appreciate all that you do.
Thank you, George. Like it's just an honor to be with you again and just to talk to you. Like, keep
listen,
inspiring us.
I'm like,
us.
I'm gonna listen. You're stuck with me now. We haven't talked in a while, but this is not the end of it. So, everyone, thanks for listening, Dr. Lynn. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.